Hello, everyone, and welcome to Different Stages Radio. I'm your host, JJ, broadcasting from Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. And you know my guest today from the Conspirators with Slash featuring Myles Kennedy, The Age of Electric, Sin City Sinners, and of course, well, loads more, but of course, Toque, who will be doing a run of Canadian dates in November and December, including a stop in Coquitlam, British Columbia on November 22nd with guest Fendo. Please welcome my guest, Todd Damit Kerns. How are you?
I'm great, JJ. How are you?
Good to see you. It's been a while. You've been
It's
well?
been way too long. Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
It's embarrassing. I don't get up there near as much as I should. I should be up there. Well, I'm about to be there in Coquitlam. There you go. So there you go.
There you go. And you're in LA right now, or were
I'm
you?
actually currently in Vegas. I have the weekend off, so we're in the middle of pre-production for a new Slash record. So he is well, he's got something else going on for the weekend, so we just came back and all of us, the conspirators, all live in Vegas, so we came back and I'm chilling at home. My mother-in-law's here, family time, and then fire back up on Monday.
And I was seeing just maybe an hour before doing this interview that you posted on the interwebs that you have a new single coming out. Because that was going to be one of my questions today with this run of dates. Can we expect some new music? Can we expect maybe a new album? Because it's been 5 years since Never Enough. So would you
It
like
has.
some sort of formal announcement for the new single coming out November 15th, is it?
Yes,
Mm.
absolutely. We have a new single called Broken that we worked on. We wrote it with Derry Grian from Honeymoon Suite, which was a really cool experience. We got to know Derry along the way, and I mean, doing Toque, which honestly started as and continues to be really a loving homage to Canadian rock that we grew up on, especially kids from the prairies, specifically a lot of that kind of music. My friend once pointed out, he goes, from his objective point of view, was like a very specific 5 year period, a lot of the music that we were focusing on, and from a very specific geographical place as well. Although obviously there's Vancouver and Toronto bands and all across the country type thing as well. But um, yeah, we started as just a loving tribute to these bands that we loved, a bunch of Canadian guys living in the US, reminiscing about all the music that we grew up on. And then we started to come up with our own music. Never Enough was I sang that vocal pretty much right where I'm sitting in my living room. Um, just kind of like, let's, as musicians get together, they start to knock ideas together, and someone has a riff and it turns into this, and the next thing you know, it's a song. So we have released several singles now. I'm trying to think what they all are. It's probably somewhere between, I probably should know this. It seems like something a guy should know, but my intention is to work towards an entire running length of an album and then release them all as one full original album would be the idea. We've released two albums of covers. Each include the second one includes Never Enough, the single that we wrote. So, but they're pretty much mostly just our favorite cover songs: April Wine, Loverboy. The list goes on. But yeah, it's so with Broken, the new single. We just recently finished mixing this damn thing. It's so funny how when you've got this many cooks in your kitchen and it's very democratic, it's interesting. Everybody has their, well, what about this and what about that? But it's finally done, and we're really excited about it. And like I said, Derry co-wrote it, so we're getting ready to shoot a video for it. I guess Tuesday. So there'll be a video to follow at some point, probably closer to the run of holiday dates we have coming up.
Nice. So the long-term idea then to perhaps put all these individual original tracks together as its own release, is that what you're kind of forecast?
It's what I would love to do. I mean, I'm saying this in a complete, for guys like you and me, as I look back at your glorious wall of music, and mine is everywhere. The idea of, for guys like you and me, when I hear a song, just a random song, uh, I can, in my mind, I can hear the next song that comes up on the record, because I grew up in a time where a collection of 10, 8, 10, 12 songs, whatever it was, was packaged together as a piece. You know what I mean? Of course, we live in a time now where like we honestly find ourselves, like I feel like it's 1950 something and we're releasing Hound Dog with a B-side. You know what I mean? Like it just feels like we're back to 45s releasing singles. But my intention is that eventually I would love to see it sort of like compiled down to a full original record, so it might take us 5-6 years to get like that many songs, but it'd be kind of almost a compilation, like say Sweet's Desolation Boulevard or something like that, where they compiled it all down to an actual album. So anything's possible. I mean, we do live in a very strange time in the music industry, so that by the time I get around to getting this together in a year from now, the idea of releasing 10 songs with a piece of artwork on the cover might just be kind of like an archaic idea. I don't know, but it's my favorite way to listen to music, and I'm sure it's probably yours. When we were just driving here through the desert to Las Vegas last night, you're listening to Van Halen, and you're thinking to yourself, what a great collection of songs this is. I mean, would they have released, I'm on Fire as a single if it was in this day and age? You would have had like, Ain't Talking About Love and Run with the Devil would have been released as singles. And then you would have had, there's always going to be songs that are quote unquote album tracks, but those are often my favorite songs,
Exactly.
And I think that that's sort of a lost, well, it's a much deeper conversation because I've been in this business a long time. And, there's a lot of, there's a lot of that sort of when you're with songwriters or producers, and there's a sort of, a focus on like everything has to be a single, everything has to be a this and that. And I kind of think to myself, bands like Rush or Led Zeppelin never really focused at all on anything in that department. I objectively now, after years of like being on songwriting treadmills and writing songs and, this has to be this and this has to get on the radio. And then I would listen to 2112 or Physical Graffiti and think, well, how did these guys bypass all that? How did they just get to do whatever the hell they wanted? And they weren't considering, I don't know, like AM radio or any of that kind of stuff. But of course, there are much bigger exceptions to a much larger rule. And I think that building an audience one set of ears at a time, as they did, at a time where exactly what we're talking about, albums and all that kind of stuff.
As it's in arm's way, I'm actually going to reach for it. I'm going to grab it because you brought it up, because I'm starting to think of a bit of an analogy here on the topic of tracks.
Of course. Yeah, that's exactly what I was listening to. One of the many last night.
Okay, so on Fire is the last track, but you take any track in here, and I find sometimes people that appreciate albums, it's the tracks on both sides of it too that help stand it up. It's almost like it's the bookend. You take out the one track and it's kind of lonely and it's on its own. It can still be great, but it's the two songs around it that add stability and flow and purpose. And I find with something that's so great as this, it's wonderful when you can hear, say, a track on its own, and whether it's a band covering or you hear it on the radio, but still to put on the record or the CD, cassette, listen to it straight through, everything has a flow, it makes sense, and hearing it any other way just seems kind of wrong.
Yeah, it is one of those things that, having been through this a million times, there's a sort of discussion and a thought process to how this album will flow, what the second side starts with. Of course, CDs change that, which I remember being kind of a bummer as a kid who grew up on like, an album had an A and a B, so that side one was Whole Lotta Love, side two was Heartbreaker, or I can't remember anymore, but you know what I mean? Like, so it was like very, you were thinking about it almost in two sets, like you're going on stage, you got to open big, you got to close big, and the flow of it was important. These days, I mean, I started to see a big change, years ago, even in Age of Electric, in the CD days, when people would come up to me and say, I like song 3. And I'd be like, what? I mean, not song, like it would just be like, I like track, 4 or whatever. And I'd be like, when I was a kid, I knew the name of track 4. I knew who wrote that song. I knew where it was recorded. I knew who produced it. But I realized that I'm, an exception to a bigger rule as well, as far as being just a full nerd about music and about that kind of stuff. But sorry, my cat's here and she's bringing things for me to throw here. One of my many cats, by the way. We have 6 cats in this house. Go figure. Um, but so in speaking with about Toque, it's kind of like we sort of work under the premise of like individual tracks are quote unquote singles in a time that really has created a lot of freedom with the idea of like not having to worry about like a middleman when it comes to the A&R guy and the, all that kind of stuff. And it's just kind of like, I mean, we may find ourselves in that position eventually if we decide to kind of go that route. But for now, it's just kind of like, we wrote a song, let's record it. Let's see how it goes. It sounds great. We can make a video for it because, we got some very creative guys in the band who can do that kind of stuff. Between Corey and Shane, they're both very visual. They've always got stuff and drones and all this stuff. And I'm the guy who's like, I just want to sing songs and talk to the audience. That's all I want to do. Couldn't be bothered with all the other stuff. But it really does create a whole other dynamic of being able to kind of start as a band that, hey, we love, take your pick. Kim Mitchell, we love all these bands and artists that we, grew up on, and we're going to record versions of them. And then we started to kind of put songs together that almost in a way in themselves are an homage, because I think individually, I don't know that we would make music that sounds like what Toque is doing with the original songs, but there is a certain element of like the music that we're paying homage to is almost sort of injected into these songs. Like it's certainly more than I would ever do on my own. I would never probably go that sort of that route, but I really enjoy being able to do that with this particular collection of guys.
Well, that's the thing. When I was first hearing the first few covers coming out a few years ago, and the attention to detail I'm finding was just ridiculous. Like
it was ridiculous.
Yeah, cool, but kind of wrong. Like just so ridiculous. And that's,
it was, yeah,
in an appreciative way. And I look at tracks like I've always had a soft spot for Sheriffs When I'm With You. Like
sure.
As an example. And when I saw that first, even before hearing it, seeing it on the list, I'm like, no. I know you're good. I know the band's good, but I think you're just kind of pushing it a bit too far. Like to do Freddie's vocals. Come on.
Oh, trust me, it's. I mean, these things are no joke. I mean, we've taken so much of it for granted because we grew up around this music.
Mm.
But man, we were really lucky to grow up with some amazing musicians, amazing songwriters, and amazing performers and singers, and like I suddenly find myself. Sammy Hagar was just here with their great opening act, Loverboy, which I pretty much considered a Loverboy concert because I went to see Loverboy. I love Sammy and all that kind of stuff too, but I watched Loverboy, went backstage and hung out with Loverboy, and missed half of Sammy's set because they're friends of mine. And like that was the first concert I ever saw was Loverboy in 82, 83, I can't remember, with Bryan Adams opening. That's how long ago that was. I was just a kid, and now all these bands that we're talking about, Harlequin, Prism, all these bands are now guys that that we've gotten to know because we have shown them so much love, and a lot of them are just fascinated with like, I can't believe you learned what's his Ralph James, who's a big agent now, but he's the bass player for for Harlequin. He says to me, he goes, "You guys even learn the mistakes," and I would kind of laugh. I go, "Yeah." Another friend of mine goes, sometimes I listen to the Toque records and it sounds like it's basically you just singing to like a karaoke track because Corey put so much attention to detail into like the guitar tones, the keyboard patches, and all this kind of stuff. And I'm kind of more the kind of guy who's like, I don't know, like Foo Fighters doing Darling Nikki by Prince. It sounds like what Foo Fighters playing Prince song. But with when we started this, there wasn't really what you would call a Toque sound. We were just some guys who loved those songs, and we're like, well, let's try and put some of this down on tape, as it were. And I think that as time has gone by, that same sort of methodology, if you want to talk about it, has bled into the original songs, where it's like sometimes I'm like, this feels like something I could be watching on video hits in 1982, after school, but I think that's kind of the fun of it, is it sort of sounds like familiar in that way, but also obviously very much its own thing and modern in its own way too.
Now, with the topic of where I brought up the Sheriff, though, I'm just curious if there's any of these songs in particular that were perhaps a bit more challenging than one might have expected it to be.
Sure.
Or there's some that maybe you tried tackling and went, yeah, no, I think we might have to put this aside and maybe just leave it alone.
Well, they're all challenging in their own way. I mean, take into account bands like Rush or Saga, that kind of stuff. It's like, those guys are no joke.
Yeah.
They're actual, like, I mean, the guys in my band are legit players. I always say, from my position and what I do as a guy who grew up playing punk rock guitar and rock and roll guitar, where guys like Rick Nielsen was my North Star as a guitar player. Eddie Van Halen just seemed like you may as well be talking about like Bruce Lee or something. I was like, I'm not going to do that.
No.
It just seemed like something unattainable, you know. So to me, the joke is always like, what would it sound like if Paul Stanley played rhythm guitar for Rush? It would sound like this, because this guy has because my shtick is, I'm the, I'll hold it down Malcolm Young style for, a song like a Triumph song, or a Triumph song as well. Triumph is one of those bands that we've unforgivingly overlooked. Not overlooked, but I think we've been a little intimidated by them. They're another band that it's, you don't, you kind of, you want to do them right. You know what I mean? So as we've done these things in our little lists of fun things to do, Triumph has always been like, oh, okay, we'll get to that. It's kind of like you put it on the back burner just out of like how hard it would be to attain it. And singing Freddie's vocals in Sheriff is ridiculous. It's a ridiculous. And then I'm in the middle of the set, and we're doing like headpins. I'm screaming out Darby Mills songs, and then it's kind of like now here's Sheriff, and you're like, good Lord. I mean, like it really is at the peak of my ability this far into my career, where I should be coasting in like a, I don't know, like a residency somewhere. It's like where we find ourselves like, no, we're going to go, play Minnedosa and Dauphin and all these festivals out in the prairies. And there's a tornado warning and all kinds of things, but we throw and go and we do the shows, and the audience is so appreciative. I mean, it's the nature of being able to play those kind of songs, which is probably everybody's shuffle playlist anyway. You know what I mean? In many ways, so that you can't lose. And then you kind of go, here's some Toque. Hopefully you enjoy that. So it's been really interesting. As curators of Canadian classic rock, in a way. I mean, that's a big, heavy cross to bear, because there's so much. Like I said, it's suddenly like, well, how come you're not playing any Tragically Hip? How come you're not playing any Triumph? How come you're not? And you keep going like, oh, right. There's so much that you're, and in a lot of ways, we've kind of, as time has gone by, we've started to focus more on coming up with our own music versus, we have been talking about like adding a few just to kind of like out of nowhere. Sunglasses at Night just randomly ended up in the set list. Not that it was anybody's like favorite song, but we just thought somebody just played the riff, and I thought, hey, we should play that. People love that song. Next thing you know, it ends up in the list. It's just the nature of that Canadian rock thing that just sort of it's an endless wealth of material. I mean, as well as me.
Well, and it seems it's kind of more in that maybe like what 78-ish to maybe 85, 86.
Exactly. Yeah. And, well, we do, we have managed to, pull out an Alanis Morissette song just out of sheer audacity of thinking, wouldn't that be ridiculous? And then the next thing you know, we're playing Ironic, and that kind of stuff is again, it's Canadian, and as a Canadian living in the US, it just happened the other day. It was humorous to me that every time someone brings up a Canadian or a Canadian band or a Canadian actor or whatever, we always go Canadian. You always throw. It doesn't matter who it is, Pamela Anderson or Justin Bieber. It's like, Canadian, you just sort of throw it out there. It's just the nature of what we do. And having grown up on the music we grew up on, and very specifically from the prairies, especially too, is you end up with the Harlequins, the Street Hearts, Queen City Kids, those kind of bands that are sort of our bands, you know what I mean? And then it moves, out into the more international type acts,
Well, now that you mentioned America, I was going to bring this up maybe later, but I'll bring it up now that I'm wondering, play along, if you've thought about perhaps creating an American version of Toque, because of course it would be called Beanie. It would not be called Toque. And if you did, what bands might be on the top of your list, bands or artists, excluding GNR, because that doesn't count, because you're kind of
sure
the extension of that. So what would maybe come to mind right away for Beanie that are going to do?
Yeah. That's actually so clever. I think it'd be, immediately I go back to thinking about the music that I thought of, like at that same time, listening to the music we're talking about, would have been the Kiss, Aerosmith, Cheap Trick, that kind of stuff. I mean, that's a vast list. I mean, that would go on and on and on, really. Obviously, Van Halen and bands like that would have to fall in that. Not specifically hard rock necessarily, but that's the other thing, is how diverse everybody's tastes are, especially when you think about when you were like 11, 12 years old, and you would just be watching the midnight special, and I'd be sitting there watching, like, as fascinated by Seals and Croft as I am as the New York Dolls or whoever happens to be on, because I love music so much. I was just kind of like, watching it. Yeah, that would be a particularly difficult one, because I think also we have guys with very specific different tastes, guys like me who veer towards punk rock and rock. And then I got guys like Corey who would be talking about Styx and Journey and that kind of stuff, which was never my jam, but respect, you know what I mean? Yeah, so that would be a very interesting, that we should try that at some point. Beanie and the American version of Toque. Wow, that just hurt my brain. I'm like, because it's such
I'll put out a presser today and we'll just start the room.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, I think back on, like, I was having a conversation with Slash the other day about the first time he saw Van Halen was on the first albums at some festival in Los Angeles. And it was when you go down the list of bands, it was like just the classic 70s, Nugent, I think Hart, Aerosmith, and Van Halen was just kind of in the mix there. But just going through that list of, like, I don't know, like thinking back on being a kid and thinking what rock and roll looked like at that time, it was pretty vast. And then you throw in the UK stuff, Queen and all that kind of stuff, that Thin Lizzy or whatever you want to talk about. Yeah,
UFO.
It's never ending. Yeah, I don't know what they call toques and beanies in the UK, but that's another one.
We'll make some calls. Now, not to get all doom and gloom, but you are in Vegas. I need to bring it up because you worked with him on the debut Red Dragon Cartel album. The news about Jake getting shot, that's just messed up.
I know.
Thoughts? Have you heard much? Do you?
I hear he's okay, which is a testament. Is testament to the immortal soul of Jakey Lee. Dude, I used to live over on the east side, and there's a guitar shop over there. It's not there anymore. Isn't it funny how all your stories end up with, like, it's not there anymore? Venues I talk about, the Club Soda was it's not there anymore, or whatever gig I'm talking about. But I used to go into a guitar shop, and I'd kind of look at the guitar. There'd be a guy in the corner playing guitar. I go, man, that guy looks like Jakey Lee. And I just never thought anything of it, because that's not that'd be like me saying, I don't know, it looks like, take your pick of anybody, really. And I remember mentioning it randomly one day. I go, there's a guy that plays guitar and he's great. And he just sits in the corner and he plays guitar and he looks a lot. And he goes, no, that is Jakey Lee. I go, get the hell out of here. I go. So Jake relocated to Vegas at some point and was real low key about it and did his thing. And eventually he resurfaced. That's love. What are you doing? That's one of them. Yeah. And he resurfaced. Our friend Ronnie Mancuso, who was in a band called Beggars and Thieves. I love those guys. And I've known Ron since about 91, 92, when they were writing in Vancouver with Jim Valance. Anyway, Ronnie got him to, got Jakey, and they made this record, the Red Dragon Cartel. And I played on a couple songs. Fitz played on a couple songs. Mm-hmm. And it was a trip. And Jake was, like, really complimentary, really sort of like, I wish I could bring you guys out with me, but of course we were with Slash and that kind of thing. And it was like, but I grew up on that stuff. Like, that's my jam, that early Aussie stuff is religion to me, especially obviously the first two albums are like, speaking of albums, when we talk about albums and the flow of those albums, those two albums are picture perfect to me. Then you get into the Jake stuff, which is a different animal, but I just love the way Jake played. And no one, I think, in a lot of, like most things as it's happening, you don't really, but looking back, Jake didn't play with a whammy bar. He was had this old school, new school thing going on. Anyway, for him to have been, like, shot while walking his dog very late at night is just mind-boggling. I from what I understand, it was the story rumor I've heard is that perhaps there was somebody breaking into a car, and Jake, hey, get out of here or whatever, and it turned into that. And yeah, it just says everything. Bruce Kulick, who is another friend of mine, has been shot as well. He was randomly shot on the Sunset Strip when some nonsense was going on, and he just randomly got hit. Which I think is one of those things that would be the very first thing in my bio, would be like the 50 Cent type thing of like, regardless of all the things I've done, I survived being shot. But yeah, it's a staggering, sobering thing, because it's the kind of thing living in Canada. It was always like, what? I mean, we always talk about this. My wife and I, my wife comes from the Toronto scene, and she was like, oh, I mean, gunshots were part of being in a big city, but I mean, it wasn't something that we necessarily thought much about. Jake and now Bruce, obviously, but I do know a few people who've been shot, so it's mind-boggling. But I mean, I guess anybody can come across some situation that can turn into something ugly. So we're just all pulling for Jake. Like I say, I'm sort of ear to the ground through these people, and I hear he's doing great. Like he's actually responding to texts and stuff like that, and I'm like, who can say that that they like actually are in the hospital with gunshot wounds, and they're gonna hopefully get up and walk away from this. It's like, if I were him, I'd be working on new music, because there's no better press than this.
Well, exactly. If that's the kick you need, just get her done. Like, get out there now.
Exactly. Yeah.
Maybe that's a little kick you needed. Back to your music, though, I wanted to bring up things that people might have slid under people's radar, like Blackbird Angels and Heroes and Monsters, Minefield. Like, that's some quality stuff out there. So I wanted to ask you this, like, or make this statement. Is it fair to maybe call you now the Kevin Bacon of rock? that there's these interweaving ways that we can, all roads lead back to Todd Kerns? Is that
that all of that stuff you just brought up is so COVID related? It's really fascinating to me. If COVID had not happened and I was just sitting in my house like this, the idea of Tracii Guns reaching out, or Will Hunt,
Killer player.
Will's a monster, yeah. These guys reaching out and going, hey, dude, everybody's sitting around watching Tiger King, and just start bouncing files back and forth, and they start turning into these things. The first one was Minefield. It's this kid named Brandon Fields, and then a couple of my friends from Ace Frehley's band, and it was kind of like, hey, dude, you want to sing on a track? And then it turns into a track, another track. Who's playing bass on these? We're not sure yet. Oh, I'll put bass on them. And it sort of became a record. You know what I mean? It was sort of, and it turned out great. Like, that was really, honestly, never played a show together. It was just sort of like, I mean, Blackbird Angels never played a show together, because it was one of those things where it's like, I think back on things like, it was Hagar and Sean had a thing together. Hagar, Sean, HSAS or something. Yeah. And I would think back on those, or Brian May had that solo kind of record with Eddie Van Halen playing on it. And I would think about these things as a kid, how these things would just come out, and you'd be like, this is cool. And then it would just, it'd be, and I think to myself, stuff like that. But Heroes and Monsters actually ended up doing a whole bunch of stuff in Europe. So that was really different. I mean, Steph Burns is a legend over there. He's a legend here too in his own way, but Steph was the guitar player in Alice Cooper on the Wayne's World movie and stuff like that. And then he was in Huey Lewis. He was
Y&T.
Y&T, Pablo Cruz, Sheila E. He's done a million things. Ended up with this massive artist, Vasco Rossi, in Italy. And he's been there probably 20 years. And anyway, so long story short is just make a record together. It again turns out this is fucking great, what I mean? And then we go over there and do shows, and there's a whole sort of rabid fan base for it. So, it's been really interesting because, like I said before, being, you get older and you think to yourself, can't we just have a residency and chill? Like, I think the Aerosmith guys, they probably got real spoiled by the idea of like, yeah, maybe we'll just put it in Vegas. They can come to us. You know what I mean? Like, And but as I get older, it's like it's crazier than ever. Like it's like literally like, you know, like this year, like people always say that. It's like, dude, where are you? And I'm like, it looks crazier than it is in a social media way. But if you looked at my calendar, you'd be like, oh, okay, this, you know, I'm here, I'm doing this, I'm going there. You know, it's like sometimes it gets hairy. The hairiest it gets mostly is when there's like preparation stuff going on, like trying to learn music for this. Like currently I'm learning music for a KISS charity we're doing in Sarasota, Florida in early December. So, and they want us to do, this is nuts, The Elder in its entirety, which is insane. Awesome. Creatures of the Night in its entirety. I'm doing part of Kiss Alive 2. And then Bruce Kulick and I just talked about, he's getting up and doing a tribute to his brother Bob. So he wants to do some Paul Stanley songs from the solo album. Will you do these with me? And I go, well, of course I will, for Bob and everything. So I'm a real, I was going to say sucker for it. That's not the right word when it comes to charity. But when it comes to stuff like this, it's like, if it's for the right reasons, of course, I'm happy to do all this stuff. And a lot of it, I know, you know, I mean, I know so much of this music. It's just usually a refresher to kind of, okay. Stuff like The Elder is a bear, because it's like, you know, trying to organize all these different guys to go, well, who's singing this? Who's doing what? We need a keyboard player for these songs, you know. And but it's all, you know, it's nuts. And then all of a sudden, the day after it happened, you're just kind of like, what was your whole life was about this thing, and then it's just over, and you go, and you barely have enough time to go take a breath before, you know, it's some other adventure to go embark on. Like we're about to get in the middle of making we're going to be in the middle of making a Slash record when I got to bounce to Coquitlam. And that's, you know, that's just the nature of how crazy my life is. It's like I'm in the middle of making a record with Rock and Roll Hall of Fame guitar player, and I'm like, I'll be right back, and I gotta bail all the way across the country into another, you know, across the border, and then play in Coquitlam, and then immediately back to finishing the record, you know. But you know, there are times where I just feel like, oh my God. But I always remind myself that if I could have told this story to my 14, 15-year-old self, he'd be like, what? Like, yeah, that sounds amazing. You know, sometimes, you know, it can be a lot, but it's, you know, you'll never hear me complain about it.
Well, you mentioned earlier, you name dropped Club Soda, which I'll just throw in just for sake of. So when I moved to Vancouver in 1991, summer of 91, August of 91 specifically.
Where did you come from?
Kenora, Ontario.
Oh, wow. You came a long way. Yeah. So around 92, I relocated to Vancouver, but we were definitely playing in Vancouver prior to that. Yeah.
Well, that's the thing. The very first show I ever saw in Vancouver was The Age of Electric.
Get the hell out of here.
Wow. First show. And
that might have been our first. That might have been.
I still have my.
Wow. That's crazy.
Which bringing it full circle too, because you were talking about earlier about the sides and having the purpose of sides. And that's the thing, is that these are specific sides, which probably doesn't come through on the screen.
Right.
The sides were called? Can you see it?
I don't remember what they were called. What were they?
There is, now my eyes are getting shot too. The Flotsam side.
And the Jetsam side. That's right. Yeah. What a clever bunch. What does side 2 start with?
Oh, it's minuscule. Like I'm getting.
I know.
I'm getting challenged here.
I have those. Somebody else can tell us that. I have that cassette still wrapped in plastic in my archives. Yeah, it's funny that I mean, back then the idea of like making compact discs wasn't a thing yet. No. So we would just make cassettes. You know, it was literally selling them from the stage and all that kind of stuff. So it was I mean, a lot of the Toque thing, when I talk about Age of Electric started as a band that we came from a scene where the only way to play clubs that we knew about was playing cover songs. And I grew up playing cover songs from like high school dances when I was a kid to suddenly finding myself in local bars playing often 4 or 5 sets a night of cover songs. And then when Age of Electric got together, we immediately were already thinking about like we were already writing songs. So we had from the very beginning started to kind of incorporate our own music. And we stuck around long enough that we just basically I realized that people didn't really care as much about whatever cover we were doing. They were more interested in our own music. And I've sort of like this weird parallel that's going on with Toque, where I find that, obviously we get a real nice pat on the back and a real, the response is so great because we're playing everybody's favorite songs from their youth or whatever. The funniest thing is all these festivals that we go out on, and it's like, oh, Prism's on the bill today, we can't play these songs. Right. Trooper's on the bill tonight, we can't play these songs. But then the idea of like sort of focusing on original music and it just becoming a real band, I guess. It's like.
So I was going to bring up that you also played bass on the Sebastian Bach brand new album, the Child.
Yes.
And how did that come around, and how was that?
Well, the producer, I know Sebastian as well. I think Sebastian came to me. He asked me. But the producer is the same guy we've worked with on multiple occasions. I've done other projects for playing bass for Elvis. Michael Basquette is his name. And he, Sebastian just said, I'm going to do this record. It was, again, COVID. Like that record sat in stasis for about a year, I think, maybe. And we just basically relocated to Orlando, which is where we're about to go and do the new SMKC record. And it was Bubble, staying together, making a record together. And I honestly didn't know, but I knew if Elvis was making that record, I knew it was going to be great. And it really is. It's in my opinion, and I know that, it's hard for me to be really biased about it, but I really feel like it's his strongest solo effort he's ever done. I will say along the way, there was quite a few times where I said, wow, this Sebastian's crushing it. Like he would just, put something out and they'd be like, wow, this is great. But being as invested as I am now, and invested in the sense that it was, like I thought when the first single was like, this has real potential. I think this really could cross over into being, into modern rock, if you want to start exhausting yourself with that conversation. And I think the reception to it has been incredible, and it was a really great experience. Devin Bronson played guitar, and he's been a session guy and on a bunch of different projects. And then Jeremy Colson from Steve Vai and Billy Idol played drums, an incredible drummer.
Jeremy cannot play at all. Terrible player.
Yeah. Yeah. That guy's
just a hack. Yeah.
He's just ridiculous.
Yeah.
And he's the kind of guy when they go, well, can you do the second verse? That thing there. It would just be like, I barely even know what they're talking about. And the next thing he just plays it flawlessly. Yeah. And I go, holy cow. Okay. And then of course we had Steve Stevens on a song. He co-wrote a song. John Fives on a song he co-wrote. Orianthe's on a song she co-wrote. So, and Sebastian's still delivering, at this late stage, he can still crush it. So no one has more enthusiasm than Sebastian Bach.
No,
I've never seen anybody with.
You can't argue that. Yeah.
No. Yeah. And I mean enthusiasm about, some weird German printing of Kiss Alive, like he'll just, dude, and he'll, go off and have to drag you down to the record shop and show you, I have this and I have that, and you're like, and it's really infectious, I think that it's the kind of thing that he's still, we're the same age, but he seems, like I just can't keep up. It's like he's 20 years younger as far as like just go, and isn't this great? And it's just endlessly positive about that kind of stuff. It's pretty awesome, actually.
Well, on the topic of buying and selling, just before we wrap things up, can you inform people about the Damit stuff that you got pimping?
Yeah, if you
find it.
If you go to toddkerns.com, you can find pretty much any of it. The Damit thing is such a funny thing because when I first came to Vegas, this is a big part of the relocating, and which wasn't even a relocation, to be honest. I came to Vegas just because there was a couple of opportunities that popped up, and I thought, yeah, cool, I'll go down and the gag was until the money runs out. And here it is. It's going to be 18 years this month, dude. It's mind-boggling. And it's kind of like, it's the kind of thing where, I just came down and it turned into what it turned into. And we would play shows. Brent Muscat and I put together the Sin City Sinners and played around town. And Todd Kerns wasn't anybody. Nothing that I had done was as far as, the Age of Electric and all that kind of stuff had very little impact to So just as a gag, I would introduce myself as Todd Damit, and it was fun. And Vinnie Paul from Pantera knew me as Todd Damit, and it just became a thing that kind of stuck. And then I started playing with Slash, and Slash introduced me as Todd Damit Kerns. No one asked him to do that; he just started doing that. And then the bass player in the Sinners, he made a Damit T-shirt. It just said "Damit" for my birthday or whatever, and I wore it on stage in this DVD we made with Slash in 2011. And then, and people are going like, "Where can I get this Damit shirt?" And I go, "This is the Damit. This is only one, And so we made a run of shirts, and then it turned into a thing. And now it's the kind of thing that's become like, we just today released a sweater, because it's getting, I don't know, not necessarily here, but everywhere else, it's starting to turn cool. So it's just the funniest thing to witness it happen. And I've said to my people many times, like, I go, I really have zero interest in being a t-shirt salesman or a merch guy. I like making music. That's what I do. All this other stuff that comes along the way, whether it was podcasty type stuff or any of that kind of stuff, I never took it. It would never take precedence over making music. You know what I mean? So it's there. It's its own little thing, and it continues to do into coffee and other things now. And it's exciting. It's all part of the music experience to me. It's not really like, I suppose, if something really took off and all of a sudden there was like, oh, the Calvin Klein people want to meet with you, I'd be like, what? I'd be like, and the next thing you know, Todd's like doing that. It'd be like, but I really, honestly, I've never been that guy. I really, everything else has been secondary to, let's get together and play guitar and really loud.
But the obvious is, of course, the Damit toque. It's just right there. Like, how do you?
It's just sitting there.
Admit the Damit toque?
Well, of course, there is the toque, which is even more interesting.
Yes.
Yeah. Which is one of the funniest things ever when you see a toque that says toque on it. I'm sure every Canadian just kind of stops and goes, "What is that? Oh, it's a band. Oh, wow, I got to get that."
But those know, and that's all that matters. And everybody should know that they must come see Toque in Coquitlam, British Columbia on November 22nd with guests Spendo, as well as dates in Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba in December. You've got 5, I believe, in a row through, December 27th in Regina through New Year's Eve in Calgary.
That's right, yeah. So it's just like the best time of year to be in the prairies, am I right?
You're a sucker for punishment.
Exactly. People love to rock in the cold winter, though.
New Year's Day, you fly back home to Vegas, I assume?
Absolutely, yeah. Actually, I might go to Kelowna and see my family. We'll see how that all works out, yeah. But warmer weather anyway, I know that.
No doubt. And don't forget about Beanie hitting many a venue in America very soon.
Thanks. Are you a Speedwagon, maybe? I don't know. Just having an yeah.
Well, thanks again to Todd Damit Kerns. This is Different Stages Radio.
Thanks, JJ.